The world hasn't always looked the way it does now. Long before dinosaurs roamed the land, before birds flew or even bugs crawled, Earth was a completely different place. The oceans were full, but not with creatures you'd recognize. No whales, no jellyfish, no crabs. Instead, some beings looked like they were built from spare parts. Back then, life wasn't following any rule book. Evolution was trying things out, and some of the results were just plain bizarre. We're talking about soft-bodied animals with teeth at the end of a long arm, or creatures with 5 eyeballs sitting on top of their heads. Some had no clear front or back, no bones, and no relatives left today. They don't fit neatly into any group we are familiar with. Scientists still debate what they are. These aren't myths or made-up monsters. These are real fossils pulled from rocks, some over 500 million years old. And yet, when scientists found them, they were so confused that it took decades just to figure out which way was up. Literally. In this video, we're going deep into the fossil record to meet 3 of the strangest extinct creatures ever found. First, there's a sausage-shaped swimmer with hammerhead eyes and a claw-faced nose. It's called Tully monstrum, or the Tully monster, and it's been confusing scientists since the 1950s. Then we'll meet a creature with 5 eyes and a long, flexible nozzle for a face. It used its trunk-like mouth to grab prey from the seafloor, a truly odd swimmer named Opabenia. And finally, there's Hallucigenia, a creature so strange it was drawn upside down for years. With spines on its back and wiggly legs on its belly, it looked like something out of a dream or a bad trip. Why talk about these creatures? Because they show us how weird, wild, and creative life on Earth once was. They challenge our ideas about evolution, survival, and even how we define an animal. And most importantly, they make us wonder, what else is buried out there, waiting to be discovered? Let's start with the one that still haunts the fossil record, the mysterious, the baffling, the infamous Tully monster. Meet Tully monstrum gregarium, or, as it's more famously known, the Tully monster. And honestly, that name fits, because if you tried to design an animal that doesn't make sense, this is what you'd end up with. It looks like someone tried to build a squid, got bored halfway, glued on the eyes of a hammerhead shark, added a claw for a nose, and then squished it all into the shape of a soft pink sausage. That's Tully monstrum. Let's break down what this thing looked like. First, it wasn't big. Most Tully monsters were only about 3 to 14 inches long, about the size of a pencil or a small ruler. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in pure weirdness. At the front of its body was a long, noodle-like proboscis, kind of like an elephant's trunk, but thinner, more flexible, and with a terrifying surprise at the end. A jaw filled with small, sharp teeth. It probably used this arm jaw to grab prey or poke around the ocean floor for food. Imagine a spaghetti noodle with a set of dentures at the end. Then there were the eyes. 2 beady eyeballs sitting on the ends of a stiff, horizontal bar that stretched across the top of its body, kind of like a barbell or the handle of a hammerhead shark. No one's quite sure why it needed to be seen in that way, but it gave the Tully monster a panoramic view of its surroundings. Its body was soft and squishy, like a jellyfish and a worm had a baby. It had a segmented shape, and some scientists think it might have had a notochord, which is the 2-beat, kind of like a primitive backbone. But the debate over that still rages on. It swam using a broad, flat tail fin at the end of its body, like a paddle. So what was this thing? Well, that's where things get tricky. The first fossil was discovered in 1955 by a man named Francis Tully, an amateur fossil hunter digging around the Mason Creek fossil beds in Illinois. He brought it to the Field Museum in Chicago, and even the experts there had no clue what they were looking at. At first, scientists thought it was a worm, then a mollusk. Some thought it might be a type of slug. For decades, it bounced from one guess to another. Then in 2016, a group of researchers said it might actually be a vertebrate, something with a backbone, possibly related to lampreys, those creepy, jawless fish with circular mouths. But here's the thing, not everyone agrees. The Tully monster has no bones, no scales, and no clear relatives. It doesn't fit cleanly into any category. Even today, no one can say with 100% certainty what it was. And that's what makes it so fascinating. It's a reminder that life hasn't always played by the rules, and sometimes nature just experiments. So what was it like to be a Tully monster? To figure that out, let's go back in time, around 307 million years ago to what's now Illinois, USA. But back then it was nothing like today. That area was covered in shallow, tropical coastal waters, more like a swampy bay or an estuary than an open ocean. The water there was muddy, low in oxygen, and filled with decaying plants, ancient jellyfish, crustaceans, and early fish. Not the clearest or cleanest place to live, but it was full of tiny creatures, the perfect hunting ground for a small, squishy predator. Tully monstrum wasn't a speed demon. It didn't chase prey like a shark. Instead, it likely hovered or glided slowly through the water using its paddle-like tail fin. This helped it stay balanced while it moved. Think of it like an underwater drone, just floating through the muck. Its most valuable tool was that long, flexible proboscis, the arm-like extension from its head with teeth at the tip. Paleontologists think it used this weird little arm like a grappling hook or shovel, reaching out to grab tiny animals like worms or insect larvae, or maybe even stirring up the mud to find buried prey. It might have poked around like a vacuum hose, feeling for movement, and then snatching it with its jawed tip. The eyes, sitting out on those barbell-like stalks, gave it a wide field of vision. It's hard to say whether it had good vision, but eye pigment structures found in fossils suggest they worked more like vertebrate eyes than insect eyes, which only deepens the mystery. But based on where it lived and what it was built like, we can say this. It was a slow-moving, mud-loving hunter, using its strange anatomy to survive in one of the most unusual habitats of its time. Now here's where things get messy. For decades after its discovery, scientists didn't know what to do with the Tully monster. Some paleontologists thought it might be a kind of marine worm. Others said slug or even a weird type of arthropod. Then in 2016, everything changed. A team of researchers published a study suggesting that the Tully monster might actually be a vertebrate, meaning an animal with a backbone, and possibly related to lampreys, those creepy, jawless fish with suction cup mouths. They pointed to several features as evidence: a no-took cord, a flexible rod that acts like a spinal cord in primitive vertebrates, possible gill structures, eye pigments similar to those found in the eyes of vertebrate animals. It was a bold claim. If true, it would mean the Tully monster belonged to the same big family as fish, amphibians, birds, and even humans. But the celebration didn't last long. Soon other scientists pushed back. They argued that the so-called notochord could just be a gut. The gills weren't clearly gills, and the body plan still didn't match any known vertebrate, not even ancient ones. They said the creature's soft, unsegmented body, strange feeding structure, and fin shape made it more likely to be an invertebrate, maybe something related to mollusks or early chordates. As of today, the debate is still alive and well. Some paleontologists are convinced it's a primitive vertebrate. Others insist it's a completely separate branch of the evolutionary tree. No one can quite agree. And honestly, that's part of what makes the Tully monster so fascinating. It refuses to be labeled. It slips through every box scientists try to put it in, like the ultimate evolutionary wildcard. That's not just strange, that's one of a kind. It's so strange that it was named the official state fossil of Illinois, not because it was beautiful or majestic, but because it's so weird that people can't stop talking about it. In a way, the Tully monster reminds us that Earth's history is filled with creatures that defy logic. Nature doesn't always make sense. Sometimes it just experiments. And speaking of experiments, get ready for something even weirder. If you thought a jaw-faced worm with stalk eyes was bizarre, wait until you meet the animal with 5 eyes and a hose for a face. Let's head back even further in time to meet Opabinia. Opabinia regalis is a bizarre little being that looks like it was stitched together from spare parts. Think of a shrimp, a vacuum hose, and a drone, all rolled into one tiny body. Add 5 eyes on top, and congratulations, you've created one of the weirdest animals to ever swim in Earth's oceans. Opabinia wasn't big at just 4 to 7 centimeters long, shorter than your pinky finger. It was small enough to fit in a teaspoon. But don't let the size fool you. What it lacked in scale, it made up for in design. This thing was a masterpiece of evolutionary absurdity. It was first discovered in the early 20th century in the Burgess Shale, a fossil site buried deep in the Canadian Rockies of British Columbia. The Burgess Shale is famous for preserving soft-bodied animals from the Cambrian explosion, a period roughly 508 million years ago when life on Earth suddenly exploded in complexity. Even among the many strange creatures found there, Opabinia stood out. When paleontologist Harry Whittington reconstructed its fossil in the 1970s, the room reportedly burst out laughing. Not because it was funny looking, although let's be honest, it was, but because it looked so unlike anything they had ever seen. It defied logic. Let's break this strange creature down piece by piece. At first glance, Opabinia looked like a shrimp, but that impression fades fast once you notice the extras. It had a long, soft, segmented body made up of 15 flaps on each side. These side flaps helped it move like the undulating fins of a cuttlefish or sea slug. It also had a broad, fan-shaped tail at the rear that acted like a steering fin, helping it twist and dart through the water. Now let's talk about the 5 eyes. Yes, 5. 2 of them were large and dominated the top of the head. The other 3 were smaller but equally important. Why 5? That's still up for debate, but many scientists believe it gave Opabinia incredible depth perception, allowing it to precisely track movement in a 3D underwater world. Remember, this was a time when predators were evolving fast. Seeing everything from all angles might have been the difference between dinner and death. But the real star of the show? The proboscis. This wasn't just a trunk or a snout. It was a long, flexible nozzle that jutted out from its face like a hose. And at the end of that hose, a claw. That's right, a claw. This grabber probably helped Opabinia snatch prey from the seafloor and deliver it straight into its mouth, which was tucked underneath its body. Like a built-in robotic arm, it could bend, twist, and pounce with precision. In all, Opabinia was a swimming paradox. It was soft but armored, tiny but terrifying, simple but hyper-specialized, and it didn't look like anything that came before it or since. Opabinia wasn't just weird for the sake of being weird. Every feature had a purpose. It lived on the Cambrian seafloor, where life was exploding into new forms. Down here, it shared its world with early trilobites, sponge-like animals, armored worms, and even proto-squids. It was a jungle under the sea, and Opabinia had to be fast, aware, and opportunistic to survive. It wasn't a brute force predator. No claws, no teeth, no venom. Instead, it relied on its proboscis to snoop, snatch, and scoop. Here's how we think it hunted. It hovered just above the muddy seafloor. Using its 5 eyes, it scanned the terrain for tiny worms or soft-bodied creatures. When it spotted something, it darted forward. The proboscis extended, reached down, and grabbed the prey with the claw. Then it curled the food back underneath and stuffed it into its hidden mouth. Opabinia was a specialist. It had evolved to exploit a niche in a rapidly changing world, one where being weird could actually mean survival. When Opabinia was first described, it didn't get much attention, but that changed in the 1960s and 70s when British paleontologist Harry Whittington revisited the fossils from the Burgess Shale. What he found shocked the scientific world. Whittington realized that Opabinia didn't fit into any known group of animals. It wasn't a crustacean. It wasn't a worm. It wasn't a mollusk. It was something totally new. And that discovery cracked open a bigger idea, that the Cambrian period was home to a whole range of body plans that no longer exist today. Creatures like Opabinia weren't just oddballs. They were representatives of entire evolutionary experiments. Opabinia became a symbol of the weird wonders of early life, and it inspired a wave of new thinking in evolutionary biology. One of its biggest champions was Stephen Jay Gould, a famous evolutionary theorist. In his 1989 book, Wonderful Life, he used Opabinia to make a bold claim. If we rewound Earth's history and let evolution play out again, the result might look nothing like today. We might not even exist. That's how important Opabinia is. It's not just a curiosity. It's a reminder that evolution is chaotic and full of false starts, dead ends, and alien experiments. This creature is a true evolutionary orphan. It didn't leave any direct descendants. Its lineage vanished. And that's what makes it so fascinating and a little sad. Opabinia is like a character from a forgotten story. It was part of a wild, thriving ecosystem full of creatures with strange ideas of what a body could be. And most of those ideas didn't make it past the Cambrian. So far, we've looked at 2 creatures that defy all logic. One with a jaw for a nose, and one with 5 eyes and a claw hose. But what if I told you that the next one is so confusing, it forced scientists to question the direction of evolution itself? That's not an exaggeration. This next creature is so strange, so alien, that paleontologists couldn't even figure out which side was the front or the top. Get ready to meet the Hallucigenia, a spiky, upside-down worm from another world. Hallucigenia sparsa is one of those fossils that seemed like a practical joke when scientists first found it. And honestly, it fooled even the best of them. When paleontologists got their hands on the first fossil remains of this bizarre animal, they were stumped. The creature was tiny, only about half a centimeter to 3.5 centimeters long, but packed with weirdness. Its name, Hallucigenia, literally comes from hallucination. That's how baffling it looked. Early reconstructions showed it walking on what looked like stiff spikes, like trying to run on knives. Even weirder, the tentacle-like limbs that looked like antennae were thought to be sprouting from its back. Oh, and what they thought was the head, that was actually the tail. Yes, scientists got the top and bottom wrong, and the front and back. That's how alien Hallucigenia appeared, and it still kinda does. Hallucigenia had a narrow, tube-shaped body, like a worm's, soft and segmented. Along one side were 7 pairs of long, flexible limbs that looked like tentacles. These weren't tentacles, though. They were legs. Yes, Hallucigenia walked on noodly legs. On the opposite side of its body were 7 pairs of rigid, needle-sharp spines, tall and conical. These spines likely served as defense, making Hallucigenia hard to swallow or attack. At the front end, which took decades to correctly identify, it had a roundish, bulb-like head. This little dome carried a strange grin and what appeared to be simple eyes, maybe just dots that sensed light. The body ended in a narrow, curved tail, once confused for the head because it curled so dramatically. With no bones or shells, the body was soft, fragile, and easy to crush, which made it both hard to interpret and rare to preserve. It had no hard jaw, no claws, no shells, yet it looked like nothing else that's ever walked the earth. Hallucigenia was first described in 1977 by paleontologist Simon Conway Morris, who examined specimens found in the Burgess Shale, a famous fossil site in British Columbia, Canada. But here's where things got messy. Based on how the fossils appeared, early scientists assumed the spines were legs and the legs were tentacles. As a result, Hallucigenia was reconstructed upside down. Even worse, they put the head at the tail end. So for years, scientific diagrams showed this spiky noodle crawling on stilts with antennae waving out of its back and a tail for a face. It wasn't until decades later, with help from better fossils found in China's Chengjiang and Maoxianshan shales, that the anatomy puzzle was solved. The tentacles were finally recognized as limbs, and the true head was identified with the help of tiny features like a mouth and simple eye structures. Hallucigenia wasn't a fast swimmer or fearsome predator. It likely crawled slowly along the muddy seafloor, using its soft legs for traction. Its diet? Probably microscopic. It may have used its legs or tentacle-like extensions to sift through sediment and collect organic particles, a method called deposit feeding. Another possibility is that it ate tiny animals or soft-bodied creatures, but its lack of hard mouth parts suggests it didn't do much biting. It didn't need lungs or gills in the way modern creatures do. Hallucigenia lived in a Cambrian sea world filled with other soft-bodied wonders, trilobites, sponges, primitive worms, and predatory creatures like Anomalocaris. It wasn't at the top of the food chain, more like a weird drifter at the bottom, just trying not to be eaten. Its spines helped with that. Those stiff spikes would have made it hard for predators to get a good grip. If a fish-like predator tried to gulp it down, it might have regretted it instantly. When it was first discovered, scientists didn't even know what group of animals Hallucigenia belonged to. It was so strange, some researchers thought it might represent a completely unknown branch of life, its own phylum. But as more fossils came in and technology improved, paleontologists began seeing connections. Today, Hallucigenia is considered part of a group called Lobopodians, ancient worm-like animals with stubby legs. These creatures are early relatives of a larger group called ecdysozoans. That includes modern arthropods, insects, spiders, crabs, velvet worms, onychophorans, and even the nearly indestructible tardigrades, water bears. Velvet worms in particular are the closest modern relatives. They share features like soft bodies, lobed limbs, and similar nervous systems. This connection makes Hallucigenia a valuable missing link in understanding how more complex animals like insects and crustaceans evolved. It shows us a stage before exoskeletons, claws, or compound eyes, back when evolution was still experimenting with the basic body plan. Looking at these three creatures, Thule monstrum, Opabinia, and Hallucigenia, it's easy to laugh or be amazed by how strange they are. But underneath all the weirdness is something deeper, a story about life, trying, failing, and trying again. These weren't mistakes, they were part of nature's grand experiment. These animals lived in a time when the rules of evolution hadn't fully set in. There were no established body plans, no proven formulas. It was all trial and error. And in some ways, that made life more creative. 5 eyes? Sure. Walking on spikes? Why not? A sausage-shaped animal with a clawed trunk and eyes on a bar across its head? Let's see if it works. Each of these creatures was discovered in what scientists call Lagerstätten, special fossil sites where soft-bodied animals were preserved in incredible detail. Without these rare snapshots in time, we might never have known these animals existed at all. Even though they're long gone, they left behind clues. Clues about how evolution works. Not in straight lines, but in wild zigzags. Not just through strength or size, but through creative adaptation. Some of those experiments didn't last, but others paved the way for the world we live in now. So which one got under your skin? The 5-eyed vacuum shrimp, the spike-walking worm, or the sausage with a clawed face? Let us know in the comments. If you're hungry for more strange stories from Earth's forgotten past, hit that subscribe button. Because trust us, nature's got way more weirdness where that came from.